The marker shouldn't exist. I'm Hal, and I've been groundskeeper at Riverside Memorial for 23 years. In that time, I've learned every plot number, every family name, every corner of these 90 acres. I know which graves settle in spring, which headstones lean after heavy rain, and which plots the families have forgotten. I know this cemetery the way a man knows his own home. So when I found the marker in plot 14J on a Tuesday morning in March, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The stone itself was simple gray granite, about 2 feet tall, with a name carved across the face, Samuel Wright. Below it, 2 dates, 1873 to 1941. No epitaph, no decoration, just the name and the years. I stood there with my rake in hand, staring at it, because Plot 14J was registered to the Morrison family. Had been since 1962. I checked the records myself when they buried the last Morrison Old Margaret back in 2019. There was no Samuel Wright in our system. Not in that plot, not anywhere in the cemetery. I figured it was a mistake. Maybe a monument company delivered to the wrong location. It happens more than you'd think. So I marked the spot, took photos, and filed a report with the office. Then I loaded the marker onto the back of my utility cart and moved it to our storage shed behind the maintenance building. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. I went back to my morning rounds, raking leaves from the Peterson plots and trimming back the ivy that was starting to crawl up the old section's fence line. The next morning, the marker was back. Same spot, plot 14J, standing upright like it had never been moved. I walked around it slowly, checking the ground. The grass around the base was pressed down, and there were shallow furrows in the soil leading away from the plot like something had been dragged. But the furrows led nowhere. They just stopped about 6 feet from the marker, ending in undisturbed grass. I looked toward the shed. The door was closed, padlocked just as I'd left it. I walked over and checked. The marker was gone from inside. The space where I'd set it against the wall was empty. I moved it again. This time, I took it farther, loaded it into my truck and drove it to the far end of the property, past the cremation garden, and set it behind the equipment garage. I even took a picture of it there, showing the timestamp and location. Then I locked up and went home. Third morning, it was back in plot 14J. This time, the soil beneath it looked different, loose, freshly turned, like something had been digging up from underneath. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the earth. It was soft, recently disturbed, and when I pushed my fingers into it, the dirt gave way easily, too easily. I grabbed a spade from my cart and carefully scraped back the top layer of soil. About 8 inches down, I hit something solid, not a coffin-wrong material. It felt like stone. I widened the hole, working carefully, the way I'd learned to do during exhumations. What I uncovered was another marker. Smaller, older, lying flat beneath the ground. The inscription was worn almost smooth, but I could still make out a name, Samuel Wright. The dates were the same, 1873 to 1941. I sat back on my heels, my breath coming short. This marker had been buried here, deliberately placed underground, hidden, and now something or someone wanted it found. I called the office. Diane, our records manager, pulled every archive we had. There was no Samuel Wright in our files, no burial record, no plot purchase, nothing. But she found something else. In a handwritten ledger from 1942, there was a note in the margin next to plot 14J. It said, "Refused burial. Family declined all services. Remains returned." Remains returned. That meant the body had been brought to us, but for some reason, we'd sent it back. The entry didn't say why, didn't say where the remains went afterward. I filled in the hole and tamped down the soil. Then I stood the upright marker next to my truck and tied it down with bungee cords. I wasn't taking chances. I drove it off the property entirely this time, took it to the municipal dump, and watched them bury it under a load of construction debris. That should have been the end. But the next morning, I found the marker back in plot 14J, upright, clean. The soil beneath it freshly disturbed again, only this time the hole went deeper. I could see it from 10 feet away, a depression in the earth, maybe a foot across, sinking down into darkness. I didn't dig this time. I just stood there, staring at that hole, at the marker with its simple inscription. Samuel Wright, a man we'd turned away, a man who'd been refused. And then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Carved into the back of the stone, so faint I'd missed it every other time, were 4 words. Let me stay here. I stopped moving the marker after that. I tell myself it's because there's no point, it'll just come back. But the truth is, I'm afraid of what might happen if I keep taking it away. Afraid that one morning I'll find more than just disturbed soil. That whatever is underneath will stop asking and start taking what it wants. The marker is still there. Plot 14J. Every morning when I make my rounds, I see it standing in the early light, casting its long shadow across the Morrison graves. And every morning, the soil beneath it looks a little looser, a little more hollow, like something underneath is slowly making room. I don't go near it anymore. I've learned to adjust my route. But sometimes, early in the morning before the gates open, I hear it, a sound like scraping, stone against earth, slow and patient and endless. The sound of something trying to dig its way up, or maybe dig its way deeper down. I don't know which possibility frightens me more. I heard her voice before I saw her face. My name is Director Chen, and I've been running memorial services at Westbrook Funeral Home for 16 years. I've guided families through the worst days of their lives, held hands during viewings, and stood silently beside caskets while people said their final goodbyes. I've learned to recognize grief in all its forms, the loud, wailing kind, and the quiet, hollow kind that doesn't make a sound. But I'd never heard anything like what happened during the Holloway service. It was a closed casket viewing. Marcus Holloway, 47 years old, died in a car accident on Route 32. The impact had been severe, and though we'd done our best with restoration, the family decided it was better to keep the casket closed. I agreed. Some things shouldn't be seen, even by those who love them most. The service was small, maybe 20 people scattered among the chapel pews. Marcus's widow, Claire, sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her face absolutely still. She hadn't cried during the visitation, hadn't spoken much either, just sat there, staring at the mahogany casket with its spray of white lilies. We were 15 minutes into the eulogy when she stood up, just rose from her seat in the middle of her brother-in-law's story about Marcus's love of fishing, and walked straight to the casket. I moved toward her instinctively. Families sometimes need support during services, need someone to steady them. But she held up one hand, stopping me. "He's calling me," she said. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Can't you hear him?" I couldn't. The chapel was quiet, except for her brother-in-law's voice, trailing off into awkward silence. I exchanged a glance with my assistant, David, who stood near the back. He shook his head slightly. "Nothing." "Mrs. Holloway," I said softly, stepping closer. "Why don't we sit down? He's saying my name." She pressed both palms against the casket lid. "He's scared. He doesn't understand why it's so dark." The chapel had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Claire, on her hands spread against the polished wood, on the way she'd tilted her head like she was listening to something none of us could hear. "Claire, honey," her sister said, rising from the second pew. "Come sit down, please." But Claire didn't move. She just stood there, her ear nearly pressed against the casket, her eyes closed. And then she smiled. Not a happy smile, something else. Something that made my chest tighten. "I hear you," she whispered. "I'm right here." I guided her back to her seat eventually. Her sister held her hand through the rest of the service. Claire didn't speak again, didn't move, just sat there with that strange, distant smile on her face. We finished the eulogy. We said the prayers, and all the while I watched that casket, feeling an irrational certainty that something was wrong. But it never moved, never made a sound. Just sat there in the chapel light, surrounded by flowers, looking exactly as a casket should look. After the service ended and the guests had gone, I did something I'd never done before. I went into my office and pulled up the chapel security footage. We'd installed cameras 2 years ago after a theft during a service, small, discreet units mounted in the corners. They captured everything. I scrolled to the moment Claire stood up, watched her walk to the casket on the silent recording, watched her press her hands against the lid, and I watched the casket move, just slightly. A small shift, barely perceptible, but it was there. The lid lifted upward maybe an inch, then settled back down. It happened exactly when Claire said she heard his voice. I felt cold, told myself it was a glitch in the footage, a compression artifact. I scrolled backward and watched it again. The movement was still there, undeniable. I fast-forwarded to the next moment Claire reacted, about 2 minutes later, when she tilted her head as if listening. On the footage, the casket moved again. Another small lift of the lid, right at the latch point, like someone inside was pushing. It happened a third time, near the end of the service. Claire had looked toward the casket with that smile, and the lid shifted once more, up and down, in the space of a heartbeat. 3 times, 3 movements, 3 moments when Claire claimed to hear her husband's voice. I sat in my office until well past midnight, watching that footage over and over, looking for wires, for tricks, for any rational explanation. There was none. The casket was sealed. I'd sealed it myself that morning, turned the locking mechanism until it clicked into place. Nothing could open it from inside without breaking the seal completely, but something had tried. I went down to the viewing room. The casket was still there, waiting for morning transport to the cemetery. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at it in the darkness, at the flowers wilting slightly in the dry air. I should have left it alone, should have gone home, should have let it rest. But I walked over to the casket and pressed my ear against the lid, just as Claire had done, and I listened. For a long time, there was nothing. Just the hum of the building's ventilation, the distant sound of traffic outside. I started to pull away, started to feel foolish. That's when I heard it. Breathing, slow and steady and deliberate. The sound of air moving in and out of lungs that should have been still. I jerked back so fast I nearly fell, my heart hammering against my ribs. The breathing stopped. I stood frozen in the dark chapel, staring at the casket, waiting for it to move, for the lid to lift, for anything. But it remained perfectly still. I checked the seal, still intact, still locked, impossible to open without tools and force. I pressed my ear against it again, hardly daring to breathe myself. Silence, complete and total. I left the chapel and locked the door behind me. Didn't sleep that night. Just sat in my office, watching the security monitor, waiting for movement that never came. In the morning, we transported Marcus Holloway to Riverside Memorial for burial. The service was brief. Claire didn't attend. Her sister said she was too unwell. They lowered the casket into the ground, covered it with earth, and placed the flowers on top. I stood there long after everyone else had left, staring at the fresh grave, thinking about the sound of breathing in the dark, thinking about Claire's smile. 3 weeks later, Claire Holloway died in her sleep. Natural causes, they said. Heart failure. She was only 43. They brought her to us for services. I prepared everything myself, made sure every detail was perfect. And when they asked if it should be open or closed casket, I said closed without hesitation. During the viewing, I stood at the back of the chapel and watched her casket, watched it carefully, constantly, my eyes never leaving the polished surface. It never moved. But I swear I heard something, faint and far away, like a voice calling through water. Her husband's name, over and over, and underneath it, barely audible, the sound of someone answering. I heard her voice before I saw her face. My name is Director Chen, and I've been running memorial services at Westbrook Funeral Home for 16 years. I've guided families through the worst days of their lives, held hands during viewings, and stood silently beside caskets while people said their final goodbyes. I've learned to recognize grief in all its forms, the loud, wailing kind, and the quiet, hollow kind that doesn't make a sound. But I'd never heard anything like what happened during the Holloway service. It was a closed casket viewing. Marcus Holloway, 47 years old, died in a car accident on Route 32. The impact had been severe, and though we'd done our best with restoration, the family decided it was better to keep the casket closed. I agreed. Some things shouldn't be seen, even by those who love them most. The service was small, maybe 20 people scattered among the chapel pews. Marcus's widow, Claire, sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her face absolutely still. She hadn't cried during the visitation, hadn't spoken much either, just sat there, staring at the mahogany casket with its spray of white lilies. We were 15 minutes into the eulogy when she stood up, just rose from her seat in the middle of her brother-in-law's story about Marcus's love of fishing, and walked straight to the casket. I moved toward her instinctively. Families sometimes need support during services, need someone to steady them. But she held up one hand, stopping me. "He's calling me," she said. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Can't you hear him?" I couldn't. The chapel was quiet, except for her brother-in-law's voice, trailing off into awkward silence. I exchanged a glance with my assistant, David, who stood near the back. He shook his head slightly. "Nothing." "Mrs. Holloway," I said softly, stepping closer. "Why don't we sit down? He's saying my name." She pressed both palms against the casket lid. "He's scared. He doesn't understand why it's so dark." The chapel had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Claire, on her hands spread against the polished wood, on the way she'd tilted her head like she was listening to something none of us could hear. "Claire, honey," her sister said, rising from the second pew. "Come sit down, please." But Claire didn't move. She just stood there, her ear nearly pressed against the casket, her eyes closed. And then she smiled. Not a happy smile, something else. Something that made my chest tighten. "I hear you," she whispered. "I'm right here." I guided her back to her seat eventually. Her sister held her hand through the rest of the service. Claire didn't speak again, didn't move, just sat there with that strange, distant smile on her face. We finished the eulogy. We said the prayers, and all the while I watched that casket, feeling an irrational certainty that something was wrong. But it never moved, never made a sound. Just sat there in the chapel light, surrounded by flowers, looking exactly as a casket should look. After the service ended and the guests had gone, I did something I'd never done before. I went into my office and pulled up the chapel security footage. We'd installed cameras 2 years ago after a theft during a service, small, discreet units mounted in the corners. They captured everything. I scrolled to the moment Claire stood up, watched her walk to the casket on the silent recording, watched her press her hands against the lid, and I watched the casket move, just slightly. A small shift, barely perceptible, but it was there. The lid lifted upward maybe an inch, then settled back down. It happened exactly when Claire said she heard his voice. I felt cold, told myself it was a glitch in the footage, a compression artifact. I scrolled backward and watched it again. The movement was still there, undeniable. I fast-forwarded to the next moment Claire reacted, about 2 minutes later, when she tilted her head as if listening. On the footage, the casket moved again. Another small lift of the lid, right at the latch point, like someone inside was pushing. It happened a third time, near the end of the service. Claire had looked toward the casket with that smile, and the lid shifted once more, up and down, in the space of a heartbeat. 3 times, 3 movements, 3 moments when Claire claimed to hear her husband's voice. I sat in my office until well past midnight, watching that footage over and over, looking for wires, for tricks, for any rational explanation. There was none. The casket was sealed. I'd sealed it myself that morning, turned the locking mechanism until it clicked into place. Nothing could open it from inside without breaking the seal completely, but something had tried. I went down to the viewing room. The casket was still there, waiting for morning transport to the cemetery. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at it in the darkness, at the flowers wilting slightly in the dry air. I should have left it alone, should have gone home, should have let it rest. But I walked over to the casket and pressed my ear against the lid, just as Claire had done, and I listened. For a long time, there was nothing. Just the hum of the building's ventilation, the distant sound of traffic outside. I started to pull away, started to feel foolish. That's when I heard it. Breathing, slow and steady and deliberate. The sound of air moving in and out of lungs that should have been still. I jerked back so fast I nearly fell, my heart hammering against my ribs. The breathing stopped. I stood frozen in the dark chapel, staring at the casket, waiting for it to move, for the lid to lift, for anything. But it remained perfectly still. I checked the seal, still intact, still locked, impossible to open without tools and force. I pressed my ear against it again, hardly daring to breathe myself. Silence. Complete and total. I left the chapel and locked the door behind me. Didn't sleep that night. Just sat in my office, watching the security monitor, waiting for movement that never came. In the morning, we transported Marcus Holloway to Riverside Memorial for burial. The service was brief. Claire didn't attend. Her sister said she was too unwell. They lowered the casket into the ground, covered it with earth, and placed the flowers on top. I stood there long after everyone else had left, staring at the fresh grave, thinking about the sound of breathing in the dark, thinking about Claire's smile. 3 weeks later, Claire Holloway died in her sleep. Natural causes, they said. Heart failure. She was only 43. They brought her to us for services. I prepared everything myself, made sure every detail was perfect. And when they asked if it should be open or closed casket, I said closed without hesitation. During the viewing, I stood at the back of the chapel and watched her casket, watched it carefully, constantly, my eyes never leaving the polished surface. It never moved. But I swear I heard something, faint and far away, like a voice calling through water. Her husband's name, over and over, and underneath it, barely audible, the sound of someone answering. The roses are never the ones she brings. I'm Miriam, and I've been a cemetery attendant at Greenwood Memorial for 7 years. My job is mostly routine: unlock the gates at dawn, maintain the grounds, monitor visitors, lock up at dusk. In 7 years, I've seen every kind of mourner. The ones who come every day, the ones who come once and never return, the ones who bring elaborate arrangements, and the ones who bring nothing but their grief. But I've never seen anything like the woman who visits Grave 32B. She comes every Sunday, always at 9 in the morning, always carrying white roses, a dozen of them, wrapped in clear cellophane. She's maybe 60 years old, gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing clothes that look like they've been carefully pressed. She never speaks to anyone, never looks around, just walks straight to Grave 32B, places the roses in the built-in vase, and kneels there for exactly 20 minutes. The grave belongs to a man named Daniel Archer. Died in 2018 at age 34. The stone just says his name and dates nothing else. No epitaph, no beloved son or loving father. Just the facts of his existence. I noticed the flowers were wrong on a Monday morning in April. I'd seen the woman place her white roses the day before, had watched from the maintenance shed as she arranged them carefully in the vase, her movements precise and ritualistic. But when I made my morning rounds on Monday, the roses in the vase were black. Not dead white. Roses turned brown, actually black. The petals, the stems, everything, like they'd been dipped in ink. I thought it was vandalism at first. Some kids thinking they were funny. I removed the black roses and put them in my trash bag. The stems felt strange, too cold, almost wet, and they left a dark residue on my gloves. I cleaned the vase and made a note to watch for troublemakers. The next Sunday, the woman came back. White roses, same as always. I watched her place them, watched her kneel, watched her leave at exactly 9:20. Monday morning, black roses. This time, I checked the security footage. We have cameras at the main gates and at several points throughout the cemetery. I pulled up Sunday's recording and watched the woman's visit. Watched her leave at 9:20, walking toward the gate. The timestamp showed her exiting at 9:23. Then, I fast-forwarded through the rest of Sunday. No one else entered the cemetery. The gates locked automatically at 7 in the evening. I watched the timestamp tick through the night, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, midnight, 3 in the morning. No one entered. No one approached grave 32B. But at 6:14 in the morning, right when the first light was touching the cemetery, something changed. I watched the footage carefully, my eyes on the distant view of grave 32B. The camera wasn't close enough to see details, but I could see the vase. I could see the pale shape of the white roses. And as I watched, they darkened. Not gradually all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. One frame they were white, the next frame they were black. I sat in my office for a long time, staring at that frozen image. Then I went out to grave 32B and looked at the roses myself. They were fresh, not wilted, not dying, just impossibly, unnaturally black. I pulled one from the vase. The stem felt normal now, room temperature. But when I looked closely at the petals, I could see they weren't dyed. The black went all the way through. It was like the rose had grown that way, like black was its natural color. I started documenting everything. Took photos of the white roses every Sunday, took photos of the black roses every Monday. Same pattern, every week. The woman would bring white roses, arrange them carefully, kneel for 20 minutes, and by Monday morning they'd be black. I tried to talk to her once, waited by the gate on a Sunday morning, flagged her down as she arrived. She looked at me with pale, tired eyes. "Excuse me," I said. "I maintain the grounds here. I wanted to ask you about the flowers on Daniel Archer's grave." Her expression didn't change. "What about them? Do you notice anything unusual about them? When you come back?" "I don't come back," she said. "I only visit on Sundays." "The flowers change," I said. "After you leave, they turn black." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Good." She walked past me toward grave 32B. I didn't follow. I started researching Daniel Archer. Found his obituary online, died in a single-car accident, no other details. No mention of family, no survivors listed. The funeral had been private. I checked our cemetery records. The plot had been purchased by an Elizabeth Archer 3 days after his death, paid in cash. I looked up Elizabeth Archer, found a phone number, called it. The woman who answered had the same tired voice as the woman with the roses. "Mrs. Archer?" I said. "I'm calling from Greenwood Memorial. I'm the attendant who spoke to you. I know who you are. I need to understand what's happening with your son's grave." Silence on the line. Then, "He's not my son. The records say I paid for the plot. I bring the flowers. But he's not my son. Not anymore." She paused. "Not after what he did." "What did he do?" "He hurt people." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "He hurt them badly. And when they found out, he ran. Drove his car into a tree, going 90 miles an hour rather than face what was coming." I didn't know what to say. "I bring white roses every Sunday," she continued. "Pure, clean, the flowers he doesn't deserve. And by Monday, they're what they should be. Black, corrupted, just like him." "Mrs. Archer, I don't know why it happens," she said. "I don't know what's doing it. But it's right. It's justice. So I keep bringing them, and I keep letting them change, every week, until I can't anymore." She hung up. I stood in my office holding the phone, trying to process what she'd said, trying to decide if I believed her. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I stayed late, hid my car behind the maintenance shed, and waited in the darkness near grave 32B. I wanted to see it happen, wanted to understand. The cemetery was quiet. No wind, no animals, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of traffic. I checked my phone. 6 o'clock. Sunset was at 6:37. I had time. I sat on the ground behind a large headstone, 3 rows away from Daniel Archer's grave. From there, I had a clear view of the white roses standing pale in the evening light. 6:14 came and went. Nothing changed. I waited. 6:30, 6:45, 7 o'clock. The automatic lights clicked on throughout the cemetery, casting pools of amber glow across the grass. The roses remained white. I was about to give up when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued, moving past me, heading toward grave 32B. I could hear them clearly, the sound of shoes on grass, heavy and purposeful, but I couldn't see anyone making them. The footsteps stopped at Daniel Archer's grave. I held my breath, watching. The roses trembled slightly, though there was no wind. And then, one by one, they began to change. The white petals darkened, starting at the edges and spreading inward, black as ink, black as night. Within 30 seconds, all 12 roses had transformed. The footsteps started again, moving away from the grave, back the way they'd come. I listened to them fade into the distance, listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I ran, got in my car and drove home and didn't look back. I still work at Greenwood Memorial, still unlock the gates every morning, still maintain the grounds, and every Sunday, I watch Elizabeth Archer bring her white roses to grave 32B. Watch her kneel for exactly 20 minutes, then leave. And every Monday, I find the roses turned black. I don't try to explain it anymore. Don't try to understand. I just remove the black roses, dispose of them, and clean the vase, ready for Sunday to come again. Because some flowers are meant to change. Some graves deserve to be marked by darkness instead of light. And some people, even in death, can't escape what they were. The humming started on Route 47. I'm Voss, and I've been driving mortuary transport for Blackwood Services for 9 years. Night shifts mostly picking up bodies from hospitals, nursing homes, accident scenes, and bringing them back to the funeral home for preparation. It's quiet work, solitary work, and that suits me fine. I don't mind the dead. They're easier to deal with than the living most times. The call came in at 1:47 in the morning on a Thursday in September. County Hospital, 4th floor, room 412. Natural causes, male, 68 years old. Name was Richard Fenmore. Standard pickup, standard transport. I loaded my gurney and body bag into the van and drove the 15 miles to the hospital. The staff had him ready when I arrived. Transferred him from the hospital bed to my gurney without issue. He was a big man, maybe 220 pounds, but I'm used to that. I secured him in the body bag, zipped it closed, and wheeled him out to the van, loaded him into the back, strapped the gurney down to the anchor points, and started the drive back to Blackwood. The route is simple. Take Route 47 south for 12 miles, then cut over on Cemetery Road to the funeral home. Total drive time is usually about 20 minutes at night when there's no traffic. I was maybe 8 minutes in, passing through the stretch of Route 47 that runs through pine forest, when I heard it, humming, soft and melodic, coming from the back of the van. A tune I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. It sounded like a lullaby, the kind of thing you'd sing to a child. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The back of the van was dark. I never turn on the cargo lights unless I need to, but I could see the outline of the body bag, the shape of the gurney. Everything looked normal. The humming continued, quiet but clear, rising and falling with the melody. I told myself it was the radio, that I'd left it on some station that was playing soft music. But when I checked, the radio was off. Had been off since I'd left the hospital. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there with the engine idling, listening. The humming stopped the moment I put the van in park. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. I put the van back in drive and pulled onto the road. 5 seconds later, the humming started again. This time, I was sure. It was coming from the back, from the body bag. I pulled over again. Harder this time, gravel crunching under the tires. I shut off the engine and sat in the silence, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. Then I got out, walked to the back of the van, and opened the doors. The body bag was exactly where I'd left it, strapped down, secure, undisturbed. I stood there in the cold night air, staring at it, waiting for movement or sound. Nothing. I was about to close the doors when I noticed something. The zipper on the body bag had moved. Not much, just a few inches. The bag was open at the top. The zipper pulled down far enough to expose the top of Richard Fenmore's head. I knew I'd zipped it completely closed. I always do. It's protocol, and I'm careful about protocol. But there, it was open. Just enough to see gray hair and pale skin. I reached for the zipper, intending to close it again. That's when I saw his hands. When I'd loaded him at the hospital, his arms had been at his sides, hands resting palm down on his chest, the way the hospital staff always positioned them. But now, his hands were folded, fingers interlaced, resting on his stomach, like he was lying in peaceful repose, like someone had arranged him. I stepped back from the van, my breath coming fast. There's a logical explanation, I told myself. The body shifted during transport. Muscle relaxation. Settling. Something. But I'd been driving carefully. No sudden stops. No sharp turns. And hands don't just fold themselves. I should have called my supervisor. Should have reported it. But instead, I zipped the bag closed all the way this time, checking it twice, and shut the van doors. Then I got back in the driver's seat and started the engine. The humming began again the moment I pulled onto the road. This time, I didn't stop. Just kept driving. Hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The humming continued. That same lullaby melody, soft and persistent. I tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on the white lines disappearing under my headlights. Then, the voice started. Not humming anymore. Singing. Words I couldn't quite make out, but could feel in my bones. A man's voice, low and gentle, singing something that sounded old. Like a song from another time, another place. My phone was in the cup holder. I grabbed it without taking my eyes off the road and called Blackwood. The night manager, Torres, answered on the third ring. "I need you to listen to something," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. "Voss? You okay? Just listen." I held the phone up toward the back of the van. The singing continued. Clear. Unmistakable. "What am I listening to?" Torres asked. "You hear it. The singing. Pause. I don't hear anything. Just road noise." The singing was right there. Right behind me. How could he not hear it? "Voss, are you—" I hung up, threw the phone onto the passenger seat and gripped the wheel with both hands. The singing got louder. Not threatening, not angry, just persistent. Like whoever was singing wanted to be heard. Wanted me to know they were there. I was 3 miles from Blackwood when I felt the van shift, just slightly, like someone in the back had moved their weight. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw nothing, just darkness and the outline of the gurney. But I felt it again, a definite shift. And then I heard something else underneath the singing, a dragging sound, fabric against metal, like the body bag was moving across the floor. "Stop it," I said out loud. My voice cracked. "Just stop." The singing stopped immediately. The silence was worse. I pressed the accelerator, pushing the van 10 miles over the speed limit. The funeral home was 2 miles away. 1 mile. I could see the lights of the building, the familiar outline of the parking lot, That's when I heard the zipper. Slow, deliberate. The sound of metal teeth separating, one by one, opening from the inside. I didn't look back, didn't check the mirror, just drove straight to Blackwood, pulled into the bay, and hit the brakes. I was out of the van before it fully stopped, nearly falling as my legs hit the pavement. Torres came out of the building. "Voss? What the hell?" "Check the back," I said. "Check it now." He looked at me like I was crazy, but he went to the van and opened the doors. I watched from 10 feet away, my whole body shaking. The body bag was closed, fully zipped. The gurney was strapped down exactly as I'd left it at the hospital. Torres turned to me. "Looks fine. What's the problem?" I didn't answer, just walked past him and looked into the van myself. The zipper was closed. The hands were at his sides, palm down on his chest, exactly as they should be. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly right. "You sure you're okay?" Torres asked. I helped him unload Richard Fenmore and wheel him into the prep room. Didn't say anything more about the singing or the humming or the hands folded on his stomach. Just finished the paperwork and went home. I've done maybe 30 transports since that night. During the day, I'm fine, but I won't take night calls anymore. Won't drive Route 47 after dark. And when I see a body bag zipped closed, I check it 3 times before I load it. Because I know what I heard, know what I saw. And I know that Richard Fenmore was trying to tell me something during that drive. Something he needed me to hear. I just don't know what it was. And I'm not sure I want to find out. His face changed 3 times. I'm Jude, and I've been an embalmer at Riverside Mortuary for 14 years. I've prepared over 3,000 bodies in that time. Accident victims, natural deaths, suicides, everything. I've seen things that would make most people sick. Seen injuries and decomposition and trauma that haunt my nightmares. But I'm professional. I'm careful. And I'm good at what I do. The body came in on a Wednesday afternoon. Male, 56 years old. Name was Dennis Kroll. Died at home, natural causes heart attack, according to the initial report. His family wanted a viewing, so I was responsible for making him presentable. Standard work. I started the way I always do. Washed and disinfected, checked for any injuries or abnormalities, positioned him on the table. Dennis Kroll looked like a lot of my subjects, middle-aged, slightly overweight, wearing the slack expression of someone who died suddenly. His face was neutral, blank, the way most of them are. I set up my instruments and began the arterial injection. This is the crucial part of embalming, replacing the blood with preservative fluid, working methodically to ensure even distribution. I injected through the carotid artery and monitored the drainage from the jugular vein, watching for proper color change in the skin. That's when I first noticed his expression had changed. Not dramatically, just a slight shift. His mouth, which had been relaxed and slightly open when I started, was now closed, lips pressed together, and the corners of his mouth had lifted, just barely, just enough to suggest the beginning of a smile. I stopped and looked at him carefully. Facial muscles can contract post-mortem. It's not common, but it happens. Gas buildup, muscle tension releasing, various chemical processes, but this looked deliberate, like he'd decided to smile. I checked his mouth, made sure the jaw was properly positioned. Everything felt normal. I attributed the change to my imagination and continued the embalming process. 15 minutes later, I glanced at his face again. The smile was wider. Not a lot, but unmistakably wider. His lips had pulled back slightly, revealing just a hint of his front teeth, and his expression had changed completely. He didn't look blank anymore. He looked pleased, like he was enjoying some private joke. I stopped working and stood there, staring at him. My hands were steady years of practice to keep them that way, but my pulse was faster than normal. I'd never seen a change like this. Never seen a face shift so naturally, so deliberately. I took photos. I always document my work, But this time, I made sure to capture his expression clearly. Then I continued the embalming, working quickly, wanting to finish. The third change happened while I was working on setting the features. This is the final cosmetic stage, positioning the face to look peaceful and natural for the viewing. I use mouth formers to shape the lips, eye caps to keep the eyelids closed, various techniques to restore a restful appearance. I was placing the mouth former when I looked at Dennis Kroll's face and saw something that made my chest tighten. He was grinning. Not a pleasant grin. Not the kind expression you'd want at a viewing. His lips had pulled back fully, exposing both rows of teeth in a wide, predatory smile. His jaw had shifted, giving his face an expression of pure, unmistakable delight, like he was thrilled, like something wonderful had just happened. I stepped back from the table, my instruments clattering onto the tray. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system and my own breathing. I stared at his face, at that impossible grin, trying to find a rational explanation. Bodies don't do this. Dead tissue doesn't rearrange itself into expressions. Muscles relax. They don't contract into specific emotional configurations. It was impossible. But there it was. That grin. I checked his jaw again. The temporomandibular joint was normal. No rigor mortis, no unusual stiffness. His facial muscles felt exactly as they should. But his expression remained fixed in that wide, delighted grin. I should have stopped then. Should have called my supervisor, reported the anomaly, asked for a second opinion. But I didn't. Because part of me, the professional part, that had been doing this for 14 years, refused to believe what I was seeing, refused to accept that something was happening that couldn't be explained. So I worked. I positioned his face the way it needed to be, used techniques I'd perfected over thousands of bodies, applied pressure points, adjusted the jaw, inserted supports, spent 2 hours fighting that grin, forcing his expression into something neutral. When I finally finished, he looked acceptable, mouth closed, expression peaceful, ready for viewing. I cleaned my instruments, documented everything, and left the prep room. Didn't look back at the table. Didn't want to see if the grin had returned. The viewing was scheduled for Friday. I came in early that morning to do a final check, to make sure everything was still in place. Sometimes features shift before a viewing. It's rare, but it happens, and I always double-check my work. I opened the viewing room door and walked to the casket. Dennis Kroll was grinning again. Same expression, same wide, delighted smile. Like I'd never touched him. Like all my work had been undone while he lay there in the dark. I spent an hour fixing his face again. Worked carefully, precisely, making sure every feature was exactly right. When I finished, he looked peaceful, normal. The family arrived at 9. I stood at the back of the viewing room and watched them gather around the casket. Watched them cry. Watched them hold each other. Watched Dennis Kroll's daughter lean over and kiss his forehead. And I watched his expression. Watched it carefully, constantly, waiting for it to change. It didn't. Not while they were there. But after the service ended, after the family had gone and the funeral director had closed the casket, I went back into the viewing room, just to check, just to be sure. I lifted the casket lid. He was grinning. I closed the lid and locked it. Didn't try to fix it again. Didn't tell anyone. Just let them transport him to the cemetery and bury him with that grin on his face. That was 6 months ago. I've prepared maybe 200 bodies since then. And every time I position a face, every time I set the features for viewing, I think about Dennis Kroll. Think about that grin. Last week, his wife came back to the funeral home. Said she wanted to talk to whoever had prepared her husband. The director brought her to my office. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for making Dennis look so peaceful." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "We had a hard marriage," she continued. 32 years, and most of them weren't good. Dennis was difficult, controlling, mean, when he wanted to be. She looked at her hands. But at the viewing, he looked happy, really happy. And I thought maybe at the end, he'd found some peace. I'm glad, I managed to say. She smiled sadly. The strange thing is, I had a dream last night. Dennis was in it, and he was laughing. Really laughing. The way he used to when he'd done something clever. And he said, I'm still here. I'm still watching. Isn't that strange? I told her grief does strange things to our minds. Told her dreams are just our way of processing loss. She seemed satisfied with that answer. But after she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about Dennis Kroll buried in the ground with that grin on his face. Thinking about his wife's dream. Thinking about what he'd said. I'm still here. I still work as an embalmer. Still prepare bodies with care and professionalism. But sometimes, late at night when I'm working alone, I think I hear laughing, quiet and distant, like someone remembering a private joke. And every time I set a face for viewing, I work a little faster than I used to. Because I know that Dennis Kroll is still grinning somewhere in the dark earth. Still pleased about something. Still delighted. And I'm terrified I'll find out what he found so funny. She attends every funeral, but she's never on the guest list. I'm Director Walsh, and I've been running operations at Meadowbrook Cemetery for 19 years. In that time, I've overseen thousands of services, burials, cremation ceremonies, memorial gatherings. I know the rhythms of grief, know the patterns of how people mourn, and I know when something doesn't belong. The woman in black started appearing about 8 months ago. I first noticed her at the Hendricks funeral on a cold morning in February. She stood at the very back of the graveside gathering, maybe 50 feet from the family. Elderly, maybe 70 or 75, wearing a black dress that looked like it belonged to another era, high collar, long sleeves, hem nearly to her ankles. A black veil covered her face. She stood completely still, hands folded in front of her, watching the service. I made a mental note but didn't approach. Sometimes distant relatives or old acquaintances attend services, people the immediate family barely remembers. It's not unusual, but then she was at the Morrison funeral 3 days later. Same position far back from the family, same black dress, same veil, standing perfectly still while we lowered Margaret Morrison into the ground. And then the Chen service the following week, and the Rodriguez burial after that. By the 5th funeral, I started paying closer attention. She never arrived with the other mourners, never signed the guest book, never spoke to anyone or accepted a program, just appeared at some point during each service, always standing at the back, always alone. I tried to approach her once, after the Kowalski funeral, walked over as the guests were leaving, intending to introduce myself and ask if she needed assistance. She was standing near an oak tree, maybe 30 yards from the grave. Excuse me, I said. I'm Director Walsh. I wanted to make sure. She turned to look at me, and I felt my words dry up in my mouth. Her eyes, what I could see of them through the veil, were completely hollow, not blank, not empty, hollow, like looking into deep wells that had no bottom. And her face, blurred as it was through the black fabric, seemed wrong somehow, too pale, too still. I'm waiting for mine, she said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. I'm sorry? My funeral. I'm waiting for mine. Before I could respond, she turned and walked away. Not toward the parking lot, not toward any of the cemetery roads. She walked into the older section of the cemetery, between the headstones, and I lost sight of her among the monuments. I checked the security footage later that evening. We have cameras at all the entrances and at several points throughout the cemetery. I pulled up the recording from the Kowalski funeral and scrolled through the entire service. The woman appeared in the footage. I could see her standing at the back of the gathering, exactly where I'd seen her, but I couldn't find her entering the cemetery. I scrolled back through 2 hours of footage before the service, nothing. She wasn't at any of the gates, wasn't walking through any of the parking areas. And when I watched her walk away after speaking to me, The footage showed her moving between the headstones until she reached the old section. Then, she simply disappeared. One moment she was there, walking past a large marble monument. The next moment, the frame was empty. I told myself it was a camera blind spot. Told myself she'd just walked out of frame. But I checked the adjacent cameras. None of them showed her leaving. She appeared at 12 more funerals over the next 6 months. Always the same position, always the same clothes, always watching. I stopped trying to approach her, just made note of which services she attended and tried to find a pattern. There was none. Young deaths, old deaths, men, women, different families, different circumstances. The only common factor was that she appeared at every single funeral we held. Not memorial services, not cremation ceremonies, only burials. Only when we put someone in the ground. Other staff members started noticing her too. Gerald, one of our groundskeepers, mentioned the funeral lady during a staff meeting. Said she gave him the creeps, the way she just stood there. Our chapel coordinator, Susan, said she'd tried to give the woman a program once, and the woman had looked right through her like she wasn't there. It's like she's not really seeing us, Susan said. Like she's looking at something else. I started documenting her appearances more carefully. Took photos when I could, though they never came out clearly. The woman was always slightly blurred even when everyone else in the frame was sharp, like the camera couldn't quite focus on her. 3 weeks ago, we held a service for a young man named Marcus Webb, 23 years old. Died in a drowning accident. Tragic. Senseless. His family was devastated. The service was packed, maybe 100 people at the graveside. The woman in black was there, of course, standing farther back than usual, near the cemetery's eastern edge. I watched her during the service, watched the way she stood motionless while everyone else shifted and cried and held each other. After the burial, after the family had left, I walked over to where she'd been standing. Wanted to see if there were footprints, any evidence she'd actually been there. The grass was wet from morning dew, and every other place people had stood showed clear impressions in the soft ground. Where she'd been standing, there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbed grass, like no one had been there at all. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the ground. Solid, normal, but completely unmarked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about those hollow eyes, that voice saying, "I'm waiting for mine." At 2 a.m, I got up and drove to the cemetery. I have keys to everything, access to all the records. I wanted to search for something, anything that might explain who she was. I started with our burial records, looking for any woman who died wearing period mourning clothes, anyone whose description matched. Nothing came up. I expanded the search to any woman who died at the cemetery, any female buried here who might have a connection. That's when I found something. In a handwritten ledger from 1923, there was an entry for a woman named Eleanor Voss. She'd been scheduled for burial on October 14th of that year. The entry showed all the usual details: plot location, family contact, service arrangements. But someone had crossed it all out. Red ink, sharp lines through every word. And in the margin, a note: service canceled, body not recovered. I looked up the plot location listed in the entry. Row 17, plot 23. I'd walked past that area 1,000 times. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out into the cemetery. Row 17 was in the oldest section, near where the woman in black always disappeared. The headstones were weathered, many of them tilting or broken. I counted plots until I found 23. There was no headstone, no marker of any kind, just grass and earth, slightly sunken in the center. I stood there in the darkness, my flashlight beam illuminating the empty plot. Body not recovered, which meant Eleanor Voss had died, but they'd never found her remains, never buried her. And someone had purchased this plot, prepared for a funeral that never happened. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, my heart hammering, and saw her, the woman in black, standing maybe 20 feet away, between two tilted headstones. Her veil stirred slightly in the night breeze. "You found it," she said. Same soft voice. "My place." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. "I've been waiting," she continued. 97 years. Watching all the others get their ceremonies, their farewells. Watching them go into the ground with prayers and flowers and people who loved them. She took a step closer. "I'm still waiting for mine." "What happened to you?" I managed to ask. "I drowned." She looked down at the empty plot. "River took me in the fall. They searched, but they never found my body. My family bought this plot, planned the service, sent the invitations, and then they canceled everything. Said there was no point in having a funeral without remains." Another step closer. "But I'm here. I've always been here. I don't understand. I attend every funeral," she said. "Every burial. Because each one reminds me of what I'll never have. Each one shows me what I'm missing. The ceremony, the closure, the final rest. What do you want?" She tilted her head, and even through the veil I could see those hollow eyes fixed on me. "I want you to bury me. There's no body to Mos." "There is." She gestured toward the empty plot. "I've been here for 97 years. My bones are in the river, but I'm here. I'm in this ground, in this place. I just need someone to acknowledge it, to say the words, to give me what they gave everyone else." I stood there for a long time, staring at her, at that empty plot. Everything in me said this was impossible, said I was dreaming, or hallucinating, or losing my mind. But I'd seen her at every funeral for 8 months, seen her appear and disappear, seen the ground where she stood show no footprints. I'd found the records, found this empty plot with its canceled burial, and I'd heard her voice, felt the weight of 97 years of waiting in those words. "I'll do it," I heard myself say. She went still. "You will?" "Yes." The next morning, I filed paperwork for a memorial service. Eleanor Voss died October 7th, 1923. Service to be held October 14th, the date of her original canceled funeral. I didn't tell the staff why. Just said it was a historical observance, something the cemetery board had requested. We held the service yesterday. I was the only one there. I stood beside that empty plot and read the standard burial ceremony, said the prayers, spoke the words about rest and peace and final farewell. When I finished, I felt a change in the air, like pressure releasing, like something that had been held too tight, finally letting go. I looked up. The woman in black was standing across from me, on the other side of the empty plot. She reached up slowly and lifted her veil. Her face was young, not elderly, maybe 30 years old, beautiful and peaceful. She smiled at me, a real smile, full of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she faded. Not walking away, not disappearing suddenly, just fading, like morning mist in sunlight, dissolving into the air until there was nothing left but empty space and old headstones. I filled in the plot listing in our records. Eleanor Voss, row 17, plot 23. Service held October 14th, 2024. I didn't mark it as a burial, there's nothing buried there. But I marked it as occupied, as claimed. We've had 3 funerals since then. I've watched carefully at each one, scanning the back of the gathering, looking for that black dress and veil. She hasn't appeared. I think she got what she was waiting for. I think she finally found her rest. But sometimes, late at night when I'm locking up the cemetery, I wonder about the others, the ones who died without services, without ceremonies, without anyone to say goodbye, the ones still waiting. And I wonder if someday I'll see them too, standing at the back of our funerals, watching with hollow eyes, waiting for someone to remember them, waiting for someone to give them permission to rest. The voice spoke 11 times. I'm Ko, and I manage the chapel operations at Fairview Funeral Home. I handle audio systems, video recordings, guest books, everything that goes into documenting and supporting our services. We installed a comprehensive security system 2 years ago after some vandalism incidents. Cameras in every room, motion sensors, audio recording in the viewing chambers, everything time-stamped and stored digitally. I check the recordings every morning, not because I expect to find anything, mostly it's just darkness and silence, but it's part of my job, part of making sure the facility is secure and functioning properly. On a Thursday morning in late August, I found something that shouldn't have been there. The recording was from Viewing Room 2, captured overnight. We'd held a service there the previous day for a man named Robert Garner, 54 years old, missing person case that had just been resolved. His body had been found in a wooded area about 15 miles from his home. He'd been dead for 11 years. The recording started normally. The timestamp showed 7:47 in the evening, right when I'd locked up the building. The room was dark, empty, except for the closed casket on its stand, surrounded by flower arrangements. Nothing moved. No sound except the faint hum of the HVAC system. I almost skipped through it. Would have, except I noticed the audio waveform showed activity at 3:47 in the morning. A spike in the recording levels, suggesting sound had been captured. I scrolled to that timestamp and pressed play. At first, nothing, just the usual ambient noise. Then, clear as day, a voice. Robert, male voice, middle-aged, speaking barely above a whisper, but distinct, unmistakable. Robert, again. Same voice, same inflection. I sat forward, staring at the screen. The video showed the empty room, the casket motionless in the darkness. No one was there. The motion sensors hadn't triggered, but the audio was crystal clear. Robert, a third time. The voice repeated his name 11 times over the next 3 minutes. Each repetition identical, same volume, same tone, same precise pronunciation. Like someone reading from a script. Like a recording being played. But there was no one in the room. I checked every other camera. The hallways were empty. The front entrance was locked. The chapel, the office, the preparation rooms all vacant. No one had entered the building between lockup and 6 in the morning when our morning staff arrived. I pulled the audio file and ran it through our sound analysis software, looking for any indication it was interference or electronic noise. The waveform showed clear vocal characteristics, fundamental frequency consistent with human male speech, formant patterns matching natural voice production. It was a real voice, a person speaking. But there was no person there. I should have reported it immediately. Should have told my supervisor. Should have flagged it as a security concern. But I didn't. Because I wanted to understand it first. Wanted to find the rational explanation that I knew had to exist. I researched Robert Garner instead. Found news articles about his disappearance 11 years ago. He'd vanished on a Tuesday evening, left his house to go for a walk, and never returned. His family had searched for years. Police investigated, found nothing. He'd simply disappeared. Until a hiker found his body this summer. Skeletal remains in a ravine, identified through dental records. Cause of death undetermined, but the position of the body suggested he'd fallen and been unable to get out. They estimated he'd survived for several days after the fall, before dying of exposure and dehydration. 11 years in that ravine. 11 years before anyone found him. 11 times his name was spoken in the recording. I went back to the audio file and listened again. Really listened this time, with headphones, the volume turned up. And I heard something underneath the voice. Something I'd missed the first time. Breathing. Ragged, labored breathing. Like someone exhausted or in pain. And even fainter. Almost below the threshold of hearing a sound, like wind through trees. Or maybe water moving over rocks. I felt cold despite the warm office. Because that sound, wind, or water, it reminded me of something. The news articles had described where Robert's body was found. A ravine with a small stream at the bottom. Steep walls covered in vegetation. The sound in the recording was the same sound that would have been in that ravine. The sound Robert Garner would have heard during those last days, trapped and dying. I checked our guest book from Robert's service. 37 people had signed in. I went through the names, looking for anything unusual. Most were clearly family members, same last name, local addresses, but one entry stood out. The signature was illegible. Just a scrawl, barely readable. But the timestamp showed this person had signed in at 3:47 in the morning, the exact time the voice spoke on the recording. That was impossible. The building had been locked. No one could have been there. I pulled up the entrance camera footage for that time. Nothing. No one approaching the building. No one at the doors. But the signature was there, in the digital guest book file. Time-stamped, recorded. I zoomed in on the scrawl, trying to make out the letters. It took me 20 minutes of adjusting contrast and brightness, but I finally saw it. The signature said, Robert Garner. My hands were shaking when I closed the file. I sat in my office for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to process what I'd found. A voice in an empty room. A signature that couldn't exist. 11 repetitions of a name, matching 11 years of being lost. I went down to viewing room 2. The casket was gone, of course transported to the cemetery that morning. But I stood in the empty room, in the same spot where the casket had been, and I listened. The building was quiet. Just the HVAC hum, distant traffic sounds. Normal, but I felt something. A presence. Not threatening, not malevolent, just aware. Like the room itself was watching me. I'm sorry, I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the empty space. I'm sorry no one found you sooner. No response. No voice. Nothing. But the feeling faded. Just slightly. Like whatever had been there relaxed. Just a little. I've checked the recordings every morning since then. No more voices. No more anomalies. Just darkness and silence and the normal sounds of an empty building. But I started looking deeper into our past services. Cases where the deceased had been missing, where death had been delayed or discovery had taken time. And I found others. A woman found 3 years after disappearing, voice recorded saying her daughter's name 3 times in our chapel. A man missing for 6 months, voice recorded saying, "Help," 6 times. A child missing for 9 days, voice recorded saying, "Mama," 9 times. Always the same pattern. The number of repetitions matching the time they'd been lost. Always at 3:47 in the morning. Always in an empty room. I haven't told anyone. Haven't flagged it in our security reports. Because what would I say? That the missing dead speak to us before their burials? That they count out their lost time in whispered words? But I've started doing something new. When we have services for people who were missing, who were lost for a time before being found, I leave a note in the viewing room. Just a simple message on a card, placed near the casket before I lock up. You've been found. You can rest now. I don't know if they read it. Don't know if it helps. But the voices have stopped. And in a job like mine, surrounded by death and grief and unanswered questions, that feels like enough. It feels like the only small mercy I can offer to those who spent their final days calling out in the dark, waiting for someone, anyone, to hear them and bring them home. The casket was facing the wrong direction. I'm Matthews, most people just call me Digger, and I've been doing cemetery excavation work for 22 years. I handle exhumations mostly. When families need to relocate remains, when there's legal reasons for disinterment, when plots need to be shifted for various reasons. It's technical work, done with backhoes and hand tools and a lot of care. You don't want to damage anything. You don't want to upset the families more than they're already upset. The job came in on a Tuesday. Family relocation, the Reese family wanted to move their father from Oakwood Cemetery to a family plot in their hometown 3 hours away. Standard procedure. I'd done dozens of these. Thomas Reese had been in the ground for 8 years. Buried in a concrete vault, steel casket, everything done properly. The family had all the permits, all the documentation. My job was straightforward. Excavate the plot, extract the vault, transfer the casket to the transport vehicle, I arrived at Oakwood at 7 in the morning with my crew. Two guys I'd worked with for years, Danny and Price. We set up the equipment, cordoned off the area, and started digging. The soil was cooperative. Not too wet, not too hard. We reached the vault by 9:30. That's when we noticed the first problem. The vault was intact, no cracks, no damaged seals, all looked good. But it was positioned wrong. When we'd cleared enough soil to see the full outline, I could see the vault had rotated. Not a lot, maybe 45 degrees, but enough that the foot end was where the head end should have been. That's weird, Danny said, standing in the excavation pit. How does a vault turn like that? I didn't have an answer. Vaults are heavy, over 1,000 pounds. They don't just rotate on their own. But there it was, clearly shifted from its original position. Ground shift, maybe, Price suggested. Settling, but the surrounding vaults looked fine. The plots on either side showed no signs of disturbance. Just this one. Just Thomas Reese. We attached the lift straps and hoisted the vault out of the ground, set it on our work platform, and prepared to open it. This is always a delicate moment. Families sometimes want to view the remains before relocation, want confirmation that everything is as it should be. The vault seal broke normally. We lifted the concrete lid and set it aside. Inside, the steel casket looked intact. No rust, no damage, but it was facing the wrong direction. The head of the casket was where the feet should have been, completely turned around inside the vault, like someone had rotated it 180 degrees. That's not possible, Danny said, and he was right. The casket fit snugly inside the vault. There wasn't room to rotate it. The space between the casket walls and the vault walls was maybe 2 inches at most. You'd have to lift the casket completely out to turn it around, then lower it back in. And even if that were somehow possible, who would have done it? The vault had been sealed 8 years ago. The concrete lid had been undisturbed until we'd opened it just now. I called the cemetery manager. She came down with the records, and we checked everything. The original burial diagram showed the casket positioned exactly as it should be: head to the north, feet to the south. Standard orientation. But now it was reversed. I don't understand this, the manager said. She looked genuinely confused. There's no way this could have happened. The Reese family was scheduled to arrive at 11 to see their father before transport. We had an hour. I made a decision. We're going to open the casket, I said. The manager nodded. I'll document everything. We broke the casket, seal it released with a hiss of equalized pressure, and lifted the lid. I've opened a lot of caskets over the years. I know what to expect at 8 years of decomposition, even with modern preservation techniques. But Thomas Reese looked wrong. Not damaged, not decomposed more than expected. Just wrong. He was positioned exactly as he should be. Hands folded on his chest, head on the pillow, body supine. But his face had an expression I'd never seen on a deceased person. Not peaceful, not neutral. He looked annoyed. Is it just me? Price said quietly. Or does he look pissed off? It wasn't just him. Thomas Reese's face was set in an expression of clear irritation. Brow furrowed, mouth turned down at the corners, jaw slightly clenched, like someone who'd been interrupted in the middle of something important. The manager took photos, documented the position, the condition, everything. Then we closed the casket again and waited for the family. Thomas Reese's daughter arrived exactly at 11. Her name was Patricia, and she was maybe 50 years old, carrying herself with the careful composure of someone who'd been grieving for a long time. I need to tell you something before we proceed, I said. There's been an irregularity. I explained about the vault position, about the casket being turned around. I didn't mention the expression on her father's face. That seemed too strange, too difficult to explain. Patricia listened carefully. Then she smiled. Just a little. A sad, knowing smile. That sounds like Dad, she said. I'm sorry? He hated being told what to do. Hated following directions. She looked at the excavation site, at the concrete vault sitting on our platform. When I was a kid, If you told him to turn right, he'd turn left just to prove a point. If you said face north, he'd face south. He was stubborn, doesn't even cover it. He was contrary on principle. I didn't know what to say to that. When we buried him, she continued, I remember thinking he would have hated being positioned exactly the way the funeral director wanted. Hated being placed just so, arranged just right. He would have fought it if he'd been able to. She paused. Guess he found a way to fight it anyway. Mrs. Reese, I don't think. I know what you're going to say. That it's impossible. That dead people don't move their own caskets. She looked at me directly. But you didn't know my father. If anyone could find a way to be difficult from beyond the grave, it would be Tom Reese. We showed her the casket. She asked us to open it, and we did. She looked at her father's face for a long moment, at that expression of irritation. Yeah, she said softly. That's him. That's exactly him. She reached out and touched the casket edge, still being stubborn, still refusing to cooperate. She asked us to close it. Then she said something that I think about a lot. Leave him however he's positioned. Don't turn the casket back around. Let him stay the way he wants to be. It's the least we can do. So that's what we did. Sealed the vault with Thomas Reese's casket, facing the wrong direction. Loaded it onto the transport vehicle and sent it to the family cemetery 3 hours away. I called the cemetery there a week later, just to check that the reburial had gone smoothly. The groundskeeper told me everything was fine. Vault placed, soil filled, marker set. But he mentioned something odd. When they'd opened the vault at the new location to position the casket for viewing, they'd found it turned around again. Head where the feet should be, facing away from the family plots. Weirdest thing I ever saw, the groundskeeper said. Like he didn't want to face his relatives or something. Patricia Reese had told them the same thing she'd told us. Leave him however he wants to be. I've done maybe 30 exhumations since then. Standard work, standard procedures, everything by the book. But sometimes, late at night when I'm home, I think about Thomas Reese. Think about that vault rotating in the ground. That casket turning around inside sealed concrete. Think about a man so stubborn that even death couldn't make him follow directions. And I wonder about all the others. All the people buried in positions they didn't choose, facing directions they didn't pick, arranged the way other people thought was proper. I wonder how many of them are lying there, annoyed, frustrated, wanting to turn around, wanting to face the other way, wanting to position themselves the way they see fit. I wonder how many of them are trying. And I wonder if someday we'll open a plot and find all the caskets have shifted, all of them facing their own directions, arranged according to their own wishes. A cemetery full of the dead, who finally had enough of being told what to do. I don't dig as deep as I used to. Don't look as closely at the vault positions before we extract them, because I'm not sure I want to know how many of them are already turned around, already repositioned, already finding their own way, even in the dark earth where no one should be able to move at all. He was still sitting there at midnight. I'm Tomas, and I've been night security at Willowbrook Cemetery for 6 years. It's quiet work, mostly. I patrol the grounds, check the locks, make sure no one's vandalizing monuments or causing trouble. Most nights I don't see anyone. The cemetery closes at dusk, and by the time I start my shift at 8, the place is empty. But some people stay late. Not often, but it happens. Someone loses track of time at a grave. Someone needs just a few more minutes with their dead. I'm understanding about it. Give them space. Let them have their moment. Usually they notice me eventually and apologize for staying past closing. I walk them to the gate and make sure they get out safely. The man at his wife's grave was different. I first saw him during my 8:30 patrol. He was sitting on the ground next to a fresh grave in Section 7, his back against the headstone. Older guy, maybe 70, wearing a brown jacket and dark pants. He had a small bouquet of yellow flowers laid on the grass beside him. The grave was recent, the earth still dark and loose. The marker temporary plastic until the permanent stone could be set. I could see the name from 20 feet away. Margaret Hansen. Died 3 days ago. I didn't approach, just made note of his location and continued my rounds. Grieving people need time. I'd check on him during my next patrol at 10. When I came back at 10, he was still there. Same position, same spot. He hadn't moved at all. I walked over slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Sir?" I called out gently. "The cemetery closed at 7. I'm going to need you to head out now." He didn't respond. Didn't turn to look at me. Just kept staring at the grave. "Sir?" I moved closer. "It's late. I need to lock the gates." Still nothing. I reached out to touch his shoulder lightly, just to get his attention, and pulled my hand back immediately. He was cold. Not winter cold, not chilly night cold. Cold like he'd been sitting in a freezer. "Sir, are you okay?" No response. But I could see him breathing. Slow, shallow breaths. His chest rising and falling beneath the jacket. I radioed my supervisor. Explained the situation. Older man at a grave. Unresponsive but breathing. Extremely cold to the touch. Supervisor said to call 911. That it sounded like a medical emergency. I called. Gave them the location. They said paramedics were on the way. Estimated arrival in 10 minutes. I stayed with him while we waited. Knelt down beside him. Tried to talk to him. "Sir, help is coming. Can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" Nothing. He just sat there, staring at Margaret Hansen's grave with an expression I couldn't read. Not sad exactly. Not happy. Just present. Like he was exactly where he needed to be, and nowhere else mattered. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. 2 paramedics, a man and a woman, came rushing through the cemetery with their equipment. I led them to Section 7. "He's been like this for hours," I said. "Won't respond. Won't move. Temperature feels wrong." The female paramedic knelt beside him and checked his pulse. She frowned. Checked again. Looked at her partner. "I'm not getting anything," she said. "What?" "No pulse. No carotid. No radial." She leaned close to his face, checking for breathing. "No respiratory effort either." "But I saw him breathing," I said. "His chest was moving." She put her hand on his chest. Waited. "There's no movement." Her partner checked with a stethoscope, pulled out a penlight, and checked the man's eyes. Pupils fixed and dilated. No response to light. He sat back. "This man is deceased. That's not possible." I saw, but even as I said it, I knew. The cold. The absolute stillness. The way he'd sat there for hours, without shifting position, without acknowledging my presence. "How long has he been here?" the female paramedic asked. "I first saw him at 8:30. Maybe he came earlier, I don't know. But he's been in this exact spot for at least 3.5 hours. They looked at each other. The male paramedic checked his watch. "Current time is 10:52. If he's been deceased that long." He shook his head. "Rigor should be setting in. Body temp should be dropping. But he's positioned like he just sat down." They confirmed it 3 more times. No pulse, no breathing, no signs of life. They called the coroner, and I called my supervisor back. Within an hour, the cemetery was full of official vehicles, coroner's van, police car, more emergency services. The coroner examined the body in place before moving it. I stood back and watched, feeling increasingly uneasy, because the man still looked like he was sitting there peacefully. Like he was just resting against his wife's headstone, spending time with her. His eyes were still open, still fixed on the grave. "Tomas," my supervisor said, coming over. "Do we know who this man is?" "No, sir. He didn't speak to me, didn't acknowledge me at all." "Check the visitor log. See if anyone signed in this evening around the time you first saw him." I went back to the security office and checked. The last entry was from 6:47, a woman visiting her parents' graves. Nothing after that. But we didn't require people to sign in, so it wasn't unusual for visitors to skip it. The police ran the man's identification, found his wallet in his jacket pocket. His name was Henry Hansen, 72 years old. Address matching property records for a house 3 miles from the cemetery. The same last name as the woman buried 3 days ago. The detective called the house number, got a voicemail. He left a message, then called the funeral home that had handled Margaret Hansen's service. They confirmed that Henry Hansen was her husband of 49 years. He'd been at the funeral, they said, had seemed devastated but composed. They gave the detective the name of Henry's daughter. She answered on the second ring. I didn't hear the conversation, but I watched the detective's face change, watched him go very still, very quiet. When he hung up, he looked at the coroner. The daughter says her father died this morning, he said quietly. Heart attack at 6:30 a.m. She found him in his bedroom. The funeral home collected his body at 9:15. Silence in the cemetery. Just the distant sound of traffic and the wind moving through the trees. That's not possible, the coroner said. I'm looking at his body right now. She's on her way here. Says she'll identify him. The daughter arrived 30 minutes later. Her name was Lisa. She was maybe 45, eyes red from crying, hands shaking. The detective walked her over to where her father's body was still sitting against Margaret's grave. She looked at him and started sobbing. That's him. That's my dad. Ma'am, the detective said gently. You're certain? I found him this morning. In his bed. He was gone. They took him away. She looked at the detective with confusion and grief. How is he here? How is this possible? No one had an answer. The coroner checked his records, confirmed that Henry Hansen had been pronounced dead at 7:12 that morning. Body collected by Riverside Funeral Home, currently resting in their facility awaiting cremation, scheduled for tomorrow. I need to call Riverside, the coroner said. He stepped away and made the call. Came back 5 minutes later, his face pale. They still have him. Henry Hansen's body is in their cooler. They're looking at it right now. They sent me a photo. He showed his phone to the detective. I couldn't see the image, but I saw their faces. Saw the confusion and growing unease. It's identical, the detective said. Same person, same appearance. They examined the man at the grave again, took fingerprints, checked identifying marks. Everything matched. Henry Hansen, 72, died that morning of a heart attack. Except he was also sitting at his wife's grave at Willowbrook Cemetery, dead again. Or still dead. Or something that made no sense at all. When did you first see him? The detective asked me. 8:30. Maybe a little before. And you're certain he was here? Physically present? Yes, sir. I saw him. I walked right up to him, tried to talk to him. He was here. The coroner examined the body's temperature, the condition of the tissues. Based on what I'm seeing, I'd estimate time of death at approximately 6 to 8 hours ago, which would put it sometime this afternoon or early evening. But he died this morning, Lisa said. At 6:30. I was there. Ma'am, I believe you. But this body, the coroner shook his head. I can't explain this. They transported Henry Hansen's body from the cemetery to the morgue, collected it at 11:40, loaded it into the coroner's van. I watched them drive away, watched the taillights disappear through the cemetery gates. Lisa stayed behind, stood at her mother's grave, looking at the spot where her father had been sitting. He didn't want to leave her, she said quietly. When she died, he said he couldn't imagine life without her. Said he'd been with her for 49 years and 3 days felt like forever. I didn't know what to say. He used to come here every evening, she continued. After work, after dinner. Just sit with her and talk. He did it for years when Mom was sick, visiting her in the hospital. And after she was gone, he kept doing it. Came here every evening at dusk. She looked at me. He loved her so much he couldn't let go, couldn't say goodbye. I'm sorry for your loss, I said. It felt inadequate. Everything felt inadequate. She left eventually. I locked the gates and finished my shift. At 2 a.m. I drove home and tried to sleep. Kept seeing Henry Hansen sitting against that headstone. Kept feeling how cold his shoulder had been when I'd touched him. The funeral home cremated his body the next day. The body they'd collected that morning. The one that was definitely, certainly, Henry Hansen. They scattered his ashes at Willowbrook, at Margaret's grave, per his wishes. I worked the next several nights without incident. The cemetery was quiet, normal. No unexpected visitors, no one staying past closing. But a week later, during my 10 o'clock patrol, I saw something that made me stop. At Margaret Hanson's grave, someone had left fresh flowers. Yellow ones, the same kind Henry had brought. They were arranged on the grass beside the headstone, exactly where he'd placed them that night. I checked the visitor log. No one had signed in. I checked the security footage. No one had entered the cemetery that day after closing. But the flowers were there, fresh and bright in the darkness. I left them, didn't remove them, didn't document them, just walked away and continued my patrol. They appear sometimes now. Not every day, not even every week, but every so often I'll make my rounds and find yellow flowers at Margaret Hanson's grave. Always the same kind, always placed in the same spot. I don't question it anymore. Don't try to explain it, because I know what I saw that night. Know that Henry Hanson was there, sitting with his wife, even though he'd already died that morning. Love doesn't end with death. I've always believed that as a concept, a comforting idea to help people cope with loss. But now I know it's true. Know it in a way that's deeper than belief, more certain than faith, because sometimes the dead come back. Not as ghosts, not as hauntings, just as people who aren't finished loving, who aren't ready to let go. And they sit at gravesides in the darkness, leaving flowers that shouldn't exist, visiting graves even after their own bodies have been buried. I still work nights at Willowbrook, still patrol the grounds, check the locks, maintain security, and when I see those yellow flowers at Margaret Hanson's grave, I leave them there. Because some visits are more important than rules. Some love is stronger than death. And some people will find a way to come back, again and again, just to spend one more evening with the person they can't bear to leave behind. The heat signature moves every night. I'm Officer Park, and I work security at Hillcrest Memorial Gardens. We installed an infrared camera system last year after a series of break-ins in the older section of the cemetery. Vandalism, mostly knocked over headstones, graffiti, that kind of thing. The IR cameras are motion-activated, designed to detect body heat and send alerts to my monitoring station. They work well, too well sometimes. The alerts started 3 months after installation. Always the same time, 11:47 at night. Always the same location, the old section, near row 12. The system would ping my computer, showing a heat signature moving through the graves. First time it happened, I drove out immediately. I thought we'd caught someone in the act. I pulled up to row 12 with my spotlight, ready to confront whoever was trespassing. No one was there. I walked the entire section with my flashlight, checked between monuments, looked behind the larger structures. Nothing. No signs of disturbance. No footprints in the grass. No evidence anyone had been there. I figured it was a glitch. Went back to my station and checked the recording. The IR footage showed a clear heat signature, human-shaped, human-sized, moving at walking pace between the graves. It traveled from plot 23 to plot 41 to plot 67, pausing at each location for exactly 4 minutes. Then it disappeared. Not walking away, not leaving the frame, just vanished between one frame and the next. I ran a diagnostic on the camera system. Everything checked out normal. No malfunctions, no technical issues. The cameras were working perfectly. The alert came again the next night. Same time, same location. I didn't drive out this time, just watched the live feed on my monitor. Same pattern. Heat signature moving between the same 3 graves, pausing at each for 4 minutes, then disappearing. I started documenting it. Made a log of every occurrence, every detail. The signature appeared every single night at 11:47. Never varied more than 30 seconds. Always visited the same 3 graves in the same order. Always paused for exactly 4 minutes. After 2 weeks, I decided to see what was special about those 3 graves. I pulled the cemetery records and looked up the plots. Plot 23, Eleanor Marsh, died 1953, age 42. Plot 41, Catherine Marsh, died 1953, age 19. Plot 67, Sarah Marsh, died 1953, age 16. 3 members of the same family, mother and 2 daughters, all died the same year, within 3 weeks of each other. The records didn't say how they died, just listed the dates and basic information. I researched the names, found old newspaper articles from 1953, house fire on October 24th. The Marsh family home burned down in the middle of the night. Father Robert Marsh had been out of town on business. His wife and 2 daughters died in the fire, cause determined to be faulty wiring in the basement. Robert Marsh never remarried. According to the articles, he became reclusive, rarely leaving his home. He died in 1987 and was buried in Plot 68, right next to his daughter Sarah. I looked up Plot 68 in our system, pulled the records. Robert Marsh's grave was right there in row 12, part of the family plot, and according to our thermal imaging logs, the heat signature never visited his grave, just his wife's and daughter's. Then it disappeared. I started staying late to watch the IR feed personally. Wanted to understand what I was seeing. Night after night, I watched that heat signature appear at 11:47, make its circuit of the 3 graves, pause for exactly 4 minutes at each location. On the 4th night of watching, I noticed something new. The heat signature wasn't consistent. At Eleanor's grave, it was bright and strong. At Catherine's grave, it dimmed slightly. At Sarah's grave, it was fainter still, like whatever was generating the heat was losing energy as it moved. I measured the temperatures from the IR data. At Eleanor's grave, the signature registered at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, normal human body temperature. At Catherine's grave, 96.2. At Sarah's grave, 93.8. Cooling down, losing heat with each stop. I decided to be there in person, to stand in row 12 at 11:47 and see what happened. Not to confront whatever it was, just to observe. To be present when the heat signature appeared. I positioned myself near row 12 at 11:30, brought a thermal imaging handheld unit with me, the same kind police use, set up about 50 feet from the graves, in a spot where I could see all 3 plots clearly. The cemetery was quiet. No wind, no animals, just the distant sound of traffic and my own breathing. I checked my watch every minute. 11:40, 11:45, 11:46. At exactly 11:47, I felt the temperature drop, just slightly, just enough to notice. The air around me got colder, maybe 5 degrees. My breath started to fog, even though it was a mild September night. I looked at my thermal handheld. The screen showed normal ambient temperatures for everything around me. The grass, the monuments, the trees, all reading correctly. Then a heat signature appeared, not gradually, instantly. One moment there was nothing, the next moment there was a human-shaped figure standing at Eleanor Marsh's grave. I could see it clearly on my screen, bright, white hot on the thermal display, the unmistakable shape of a person. I looked up from the screen, looked with my eyes at where the signature was standing. There was nothing there. No person, no visible presence, just an empty grave and a weathered headstone. But on the thermal display, clear as day, a figure stood at the grave. I could see the head, the torso, the arms hanging at its sides, could see it standing perfectly still facing the headstone. I counted. 4 minutes exactly. Then the figure moved, walking at a normal pace to Catherine's grave. I watched it on my screen, watched the heat signature travel between the plots. And I kept looking up, kept checking with my eyes, and saw nothing but empty cemetery. At Catherine's grave, the figure stopped again. The heat signature was slightly dimmer now. I could measure it on my device down to 96 degrees. still well above ambient temperature, but dropping. 4 minutes. Then it moved to Sarah's grave. I started walking closer, slowly, carefully, keeping my eyes on both the thermal display and the physical space. The heat signature stood at Sarah's grave, dimmer still. 93.8 degrees. I was 20 feet away when it turned. On my thermal display, the figure's heat signature rotated. Not quickly, just a slow turn, like someone becoming aware of being watched. It faced my direction. I stopped walking, stood frozen in the darkness, staring at my screen. The figure was looking at me, looking through the dark, through the 40 feet of space between us, looking directly at where I stood. And then it started walking toward me. I didn't run. Something kept me rooted there, watching the heat signature approach on my screen. I could track its movement, precisely steady walking pace, arms swinging naturally. It came within 10 feet, within 5 feet. I looked up from the screen. Still nothing, just cold air and empty cemetery, and my own hammering heartbeat. But on the thermal display, the figure stood right in front of me, close enough to touch. The heat signature clear and unmistakable, human-shaped, facing me. I forced myself to speak. "Can you hear me?" No response. The figure just stood there, the heat signature steady at 91 degrees now. Cooling further. "Are you Robert Marsh?" The figure tilted its head, just slightly, just enough to show it was listening. "They're here," I said. My voice sounded strange in the quiet. "Your wife and daughters, they're here and they're safe. You visit them every night. You haven't left them." The heat signature remained motionless for a long moment. Then it turned away from me and walked back to the graves. Back to Sarah's plot, back to the last position it always visited. It stood there for the remaining 2 minutes of its 4-minute pause. I watched on my screen as the heat signature grew dimmer, grew fainter. 89 degrees, 86, 82. At exactly 4 minutes, it dropped to ambient temperature. Just disappeared from the thermal display, the heat bleeding away until there was nothing left to detect. I stood there for a long time after, staring at the 3 graves, Eleanor, Catherine, Sarah, and next to them, Robert. 4 plots, 4 headstones, 4 members of a family broken by fire in 1953. I checked my thermal display one more time. Everything showed normal temperatures. The graves were just graves. The cemetery, just a cemetery. But in daylight, I walked row 12 and looked closely at the 3 graves the heat signature visits. At Eleanor's grave, the grass grows differently. Greener, healthier, like it's being tended regularly. At Catherine's grave, the same. At Sarah's grave, too. Robert's grave, right next to Sarah's, looks normal. Nothing special about the grass. Nothing remarkable about the plot. But someone or something is taking care of the other 3, visiting every night, standing with them, spending exactly 4 minutes at each grave, keeping vigil, maintaining presence. The IR alerts still come every night at 11:47. I don't investigate anymore. Just make note in the log and watch the thermal feed. Watch that heat signature make its rounds. Watch it fade and disappear. Because some people don't stop caring for their family. Don't stop visiting. Don't stop mourning. Even 68 years after the fire. Even 34 years after their own death. Some love generates heat that cameras can detect. Warmth that technology can measure. Heat that appears every night at the same time, walking the same path, standing at the same graves. And I'm not going to interfere with that. Not going to question it or investigate it or try to make it stop. Because if I died and left behind the people I loved most, I'd want to visit them too, every night, forever. Heat signature or not. The corridor whispers after 11. I'm Stein, and I've been headkeeper at Thornhill Mausoleum for 9 years. Thornhill is old, built in 1913. Back when wealthy families built private mausoleums that looked like Roman temples. My job is maintenance, security, and keeping the place respectful for the families who still visit. The building has good acoustics. Sound carries in strange ways through the marble halls, echoing off the high ceilings and stone walls. You learn to recognize the normal sounds, the ventilation system, the settling of old masonry, footsteps on the tile floors. After a while, you stop noticing them, but the whispers are different. They started maybe 6 months ago. At first, I thought it was the ventilation air moving through ducts can sometimes sound like distant voices. But ventilation sounds consistent. These whispers varied. Sometimes louder, sometimes softer, sometimes one voice, sometimes many. Always after 11 at night. I work late sometimes, handling maintenance that's easier to do when families aren't visiting. Replacing flowers, cleaning niches, that kind of thing. The mausoleum is open until 8 in the evening, and I usually stay until midnight or so, locking up before I leave. The first time I really noticed the whispers was on a Tuesday in March. I was in the East Wing, replacing light bulbs, when I heard voices coming from the South Corridor. Not loud, just a murmur, like people talking quietly. I figured it was visitors who'd stayed past closing, so I walked down to check. The South Corridor was empty, but I could still hear the whispers, clearer now that I was in the corridor itself. Multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in conversational tones. I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm and cadence of speech. I checked every niche, every corner, called out, "Is anyone here?" a few times. No response, except the whispers, which continued unchanged. I started paying attention after that, started noticing patterns. The whispers appeared most consistently in the South Corridor, but I heard them in other wings too, always after 11. Always multiple voices, and always speaking about something just below the threshold of comprehension. I tried recording it, brought my phone and captured audio during one of the late-night sessions. When I played it back the next morning, the whispers were there on the recording, faint but unmistakable. I ran it through audio enhancement software, tried to isolate the voices and clarify the words. That's when I started to understand what they were saying. The whispers were speaking names, full names, spoken clearly once the audio was enhanced. Names like Margaret Eleanor Thompson, and Robert James Morrison, and Catherine Ann Walsh. I looked up the names in our mausoleum directory. Every single one matched someone interred in Thornhill. They were saying the names of the dead. I kept recording, collected hours of audio over the next few weeks, enhanced it all, transcribed every name I could identify, created a list of over 50 names, all of them people buried in the mausoleum. Then I cross-referenced the names with burial dates, and I found something that made my hands go cold. The names being whispered were people who died recently, within the last year, most of them. The newest burials, the most recent arrivals to Thornhill. And the whispers weren't random. They followed a pattern. Each name would be spoken multiple times over several nights, then fade away. And eventually, new names would appear in the whispers, replacing the old ones. It was like the mausoleum was learning the names, taking inventory, getting acquainted with its newest residents. I started listening more carefully to the specific voices. Some were male, some female, some old-sounding, some younger. But there were recurring voices, the same tones and qualities appearing across different recordings. I tried to count how many distinct voices I was hearing. Lost track after 20, maybe 30 different speakers, maybe more. I decided to stay overnight. Wanted to track the whispers through their entire cycle, from when they started until they stopped. I told my supervisor I was doing inventory work, set up a cot in the office, and settled in to listen. The whispers began at exactly 11:03. I was in the South Corridor when they started. The sound began quietly, just a faint murmur. Then it grew gradually louder, more voices joining in. By 11:15, the corridor was full of overlapping speech. Still not loud about the volume of normal conversation, but dense, layered, dozens of voices all speaking at once. I walked slowly down the corridor, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. But it wasn't coming from any specific location. It was everywhere, coming from the walls themselves, from the marble niches, from the very structure of the building. At 11:45, I heard my own name, David Stein, clear as a bell. One voice, male, speaking with absolute clarity. My full name. I stopped walking. Who said that? The whispers continued, unconcerned with my question. But every minute or so, I'd hear it again. David Stein. Different voices each time. Male, female, old, young. All saying my name. What do you want? I asked the empty corridor. The whispers stopped, not gradually, all at once. Complete silence fell over the mausoleum, so sudden and total that I could hear my own heartbeat. Then one voice spoke, just one, clear and deliberate. David Stein, born March 7th, 1982. My birth date. My exact birth date. Who are you? My voice cracked. We are here. We have always been here. What do you want from me? We speak the names. We remember. That is what we are for. I felt dizzy, leaned against the wall for support, the cold marble pressing against my palm. I don't understand. You will. The voice was gentle, almost kind. When your name is spoken in past tense, when your dates have an ending, you will understand then. When I die, when you are remembered, when you become a name in the whispers. The other voices started again, gradually at first, then building. Names upon names upon names, dozens of them, hundreds of them. Every person interred in Thornhill, I realized. Every body in every niche, every urn in every wall, all of them being spoken, being remembered, being kept alive in the whispers of the dead. I left the corridor, went back to my office and sat there until dawn, listening to the muffled sound of voices through the walls. At 6:04 in the morning, they stopped, faded away like they'd never been there. I've kept working at Thornhill, still do the maintenance, still lock up at night, but I don't stay past 11 anymore. Don't work late, don't linger in the corridors after the whispers begin. Because last week, I heard something new. I was leaving at 10:45, walking through the south corridor on my way to the exit, and I heard a voice, just one, very faint, speaking a name I didn't recognize at first. David Stein, born March 7th, 1982. Then it added something that made me run for the exit and slam the door behind me. It added a second date, a date in the future, specific, precise, November 3rd, 2047. 22 years from now, the date according to the whispers, when my name will change from present tense to past tense, when I'll join the voices in the walls, when I'll become one of the speakers instead of the listener. I don't know if it's true. Don't know if the whispers can predict death or if they're just playing with me. But I check that date every morning on my calendar. Count the days, count the years. And every night at 11, in the south corridor of Thornhill Mausoleum, voices whisper in the darkness, remembering the dead, learning the names, preparing for the ones who haven't arrived yet, preparing for the day when my name will be whispered to, in past tense, with 2 dates instead of 1, and I'll finally understand what they meant. When I become a name in the whispers, I'll know what I am for. I'll know what we're all for in the end. Three families said the same thing. I'm Director Martinez, and I've been running services at Evergreen Funeral Home for 12 years. In that time, I've prepared hundreds of viewings, handled countless families, overseen every kind of funeral service imaginable. I take pride in my work, pride in making sure everything is perfect, that families can say goodbye to their loved ones with dignity and peace. But in April of this year, something started happening that I can't explain. The first was the Henderson service. Margaret Henderson, 78 years old, died peacefully in her sleep after a long illness. We prepared her carefully. My staff and I have years of experience in restorative work. When we finished, She looked exactly as she should. Peaceful, properly positioned, cosmetically prepared to look natural and restful. The viewing was on a Saturday afternoon. The family arrived, and I stood at the back of the room as they approached the casket. Standard procedure. I'm always present during initial viewings in case families need support. Margaret's daughter, Susan, was the first to look into the casket. She stood there for a long moment, very still. Then she turned to me with a confused expression. "Director Martinez," she said, "this isn't how Mom looked when she died." My chest tightened. "I assure you, we've taken every care." "No, you don't understand." Susan looked back at the casket. "She looks younger. Her face, it doesn't look like it did those last few months. It looks like she did maybe 10 years ago." I walked over and looked at Margaret Henderson myself. She looked exactly as she had when we'd finished preparation that morning. Exactly as I documented in our pre-viewing photos. "Sometimes the preparation process can make people appear more rested," I said gently. "It's normal for families to notice." It's not just that. Margaret's son, Thomas, had joined his sister. Look at her expression. She looks happy. Actually happy. Mom was in pain those last weeks. She looked tired, worn down. But this, he gestured at the casket. She looks like she's at peace, like she's actually content. I assured them we'd simply done our best to restore her to a restful appearance. They seemed to accept that, though I could see the confusion remained. The service proceeded normally. But that night, I pulled the preparation photos, compared them to the pictures I'd taken during the viewing, and I saw what they meant. Something had changed. The photos from the morning showed Margaret as we'd prepared her appropriate, professional, properly done. But the photos from the viewing showed subtle differences. Her expression was softer, more peaceful. The lines around her eyes were less pronounced. She looked, as Susan had said, younger. I checked the casket after the family left. Margaret looked exactly as she had in the viewing photos. The changes were still there. I told myself it was lighting, camera angles, tricks of perception. But I documented everything carefully, because something felt wrong. The second case was the Morrison service 2 weeks later. James Morrison, 62, died of a sudden heart attack. His death had been traumatic for the family. He'd collapsed at his daughter's wedding. Died before the ambulance arrived. The family was devastated. We prepared him with extra care. James had died with a pained expression, and we worked to relax his features into something more peaceful. Standard post-mortem preparation. When we finished, he looked appropriate for viewing. His wife, Patricia, was the first to see him. She stood at the casket for maybe 30 seconds before she called me over. "Director Martinez, something's different." "Different how, Mrs. Morrison?" "James he looks like he did 20 years ago. Before the stress, before the heart problems started. He looks healthy." She touched the casket edge. "He doesn't look like someone who just died of a heart attack. He looks like he's sleeping, like he's genuinely at rest." I looked at James Morrison, and I saw it immediately. The same change I'd seen with Margaret Henderson. His face had softened. The strain lines had diminished. He looked younger, more vital. His expression held a peace that hadn't been there that morning. "We do our best to provide comfort," I said. But my voice sounded uncertain even to me. Patricia Morrison looked at me directly. "This isn't your preparation work. I can see what you did, it's excellent. But this is something else. Something changed between when you finished and when I walked in here." I had no answer for her. The third case broke the pattern completely. The Valdez service. Maria Valdez, 54, killed in a car accident. Severe trauma. We'd done closed casket initially because the damage was too extensive. But the family insisted on viewing, said they needed to see her one last time. We did everything we could, extensive restoration, careful cosmetic work. It was some of the most difficult preparation I'd ever supervised. When we finished, Maria looked acceptable. Not perfect, impossible given the circumstances, but presentable. Enough for the family to have their moment. The viewing was scheduled for Thursday evening. I opened the casket that afternoon to do a final check before the family arrived. Maria Valdez looked completely different. Not just younger, not just more peaceful. She looked uninjured. The reconstructive work we'd done was still visible in the technical sense. I could see our techniques, our materials. But her face itself had changed. The trauma that had been impossible to fully hide was simply gone. She looked like she died peacefully in her sleep. I called my head mortician, Stevens. "Did you do additional work on the Valdez case?" "No, sir. We finished yesterday afternoon. Haven't touched her since. Come to viewing room 3. Now." Stevens arrived 3 minutes later, looked at Maria Valdez, went pale. "That's not what she looked like yesterday," he said. "I know. That's not possible. Those injuries, we did everything we could, but there's no way to make them disappear completely. We can minimize, we can restore, but not like this." We stood there, both of us staring at the casket, at a dead woman who looked more at peace than any preparation technique could achieve. The family arrived an hour later. Maria's husband, Carlos, approached the casket slowly, stood looking at his wife for a long time. Then he turned to me, with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for giving her back to me this way. She looks like she did before, like nothing bad ever happened, like she's just sleeping." I didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to explain that we hadn't done this, that something else had changed his wife's appearance. After the service, I pulled all the documentation. Margaret Henderson, James Morrison, Maria Valdez. 3 cases in 6 weeks. 3 families who said their loved ones looked different, looked younger, more peaceful, transformed. I compared the preparation photos to the viewing photos in all 3 cases. The changes were undeniable, subtle in some ways, dramatic in others, but consistent. Each deceased person looked more at peace in the viewing than they had in preparation. Each one looked younger, healthier, released from whatever pain or trauma had marked their death. I started watching more carefully after that, started taking photos before and during every viewing, checking for changes, and I found them. Not in every case, maybe 1 in 10, but often enough to establish a pattern. The deceased would change between preparation and viewing, would transform in ways that defied explanation, would become something more peaceful than we'd made them, something more whole. Last week, we had a viewing for a young man who died by suicide, 23 years old. His family was destroyed, couldn't understand why he'd done it. The preparation had been difficult. His face had held so much anguish, even in death. But when the family arrived for the viewing, his mother gasped. "He looks happy. For the first time in years, he actually looks happy." And he did. His expression had changed completely. The pain was gone. He looked content, at peace, like he'd finally found something he'd been searching for. His mother wept over the casket. "I know he's gone," she said. "I know he's not coming back. But seeing him like this, it helps. It helps to know he's not suffering anymore, that wherever he is, he's finally okay. I don't know what's happening. Don't know if it's some unconscious skill my staff has developed, some technique I'm not aware of. Don't know if it's the grieving families seeing what they need to see, their minds transforming their loved ones' appearances into something more bearable. Or if it's something else, something that happens in the hours between when we finish our work and when families come to say goodbye. Something that takes our carefully prepared dead and transforms them one more time. Makes them younger, makes them peaceful, removes the marks of pain and trauma and suffering. Makes them look not like corpses, but like people who've simply fallen asleep and are dreaming something wonderful. I've stopped trying to explain it, stopped comparing photos, stopped documenting the changes, because whether it's real or perception, whether it's technique or miracle, it serves the same purpose. It gives families peace, lets them see their loved ones not as death left them, but as they want to remember them, young, peaceful, free from pain. And maybe that's what death is supposed to look like. Not an ending, but a transformation. Not loss, but peace. I see it now in almost every viewing. That subtle change, that gentle transformation, and I've learned to simply stand back and let it happen. Let whatever force is at work, skill or spirit or mercy, do what it does best. Give the dead back their peace, and give the living one last image of their loved ones that doesn't show death, but shows rest. Shows them finally, genuinely okay. The door wasn't on any of the plans. I'm Lena, and I work in historic cemetery restoration. When old mausoleums need repairs, when family crypts require structural work, I'm part of the team that does it. It's specialized work you're dealing with. Buildings that are sometimes over 100 years old, working around human remains, preserving both structure and dignity. The Ashford family mausoleum was built in 1907. A beautiful structure, Victorian Gothic style, marble and granite with elaborate carvings. The family hired us to do comprehensive restoration, repair water damage, stabilize the foundation, clean and preserve the interior. I was doing the initial survey, mapping out the interior space and documenting existing conditions. The mausoleum had the standard layout, a main chamber with crypts along the walls, a small altar area, decorative stonework. Everything matched the original architectural drawings from 1907, except for the door. I found it at the back of the main chamber, behind a memorial bench. Small, maybe 5 feet tall, 3 feet wide, heavy wood, iron-bound, with an old-style padlock holding it shut. The wood was dark with age, the metal deeply rusted. I pulled out the architectural plans, looked at the layout. The door wasn't there. The drawings showed a solid wall, where the door actually existed. I called my supervisor, Marcus. We've got a discrepancy. There's a door in the back that's not on the original plans, probably added later. Check for permits or modification records. I checked. The Ashford family records showed no modifications to the structure, no permits filed, no work done beyond basic maintenance since the mausoleum was built. According to every official document, that door didn't exist. But I was looking right at it. I tried the lock. Rusted, solid, wouldn't turn. The padlock was old, the kind that needed a skeleton key. No way to open it without cutting it off. Do we have clearance to investigate? I asked Marcus. It's part of the structure we're restoring. If there's a space back there that needs work, we need access. Get it open. I used bolt cutters on the padlock. It took some effort. The old metal was tough, but eventually the shackle snapped. I set the broken lock aside and pulled at the door. It didn't move. I tried harder, pulling with both hands. The door was locked from the inside. I could hear the mechanism, a heavy bolt or bar, holding it shut from the other side. Locked from the outside with a padlock, locked from the inside with a bolt, double locked, like someone wanted to make absolutely sure it stayed closed. I looked at the door more carefully. There were scratches on the wood, deep gouges, like something had clawed at it from the inside. The marks were old, worn smooth by time, but unmistakable. Something on the inside had tried to get out, or something on the outside had been trying to keep something in. I reported it to Marcus. He came down to look personally, examined the door, the scratches, the double locks. "This is concerning," he said quietly. "Get the structural plans. I want to know what's supposed to be behind this wall." We measured. The main chamber was 30 feet deep. The back wall was 28 feet from the front entrance. That left 2 feet of unaccounted space behind the door. But when we checked the exterior dimensions, the mausoleum was actually 33 feet deep, which meant there was 5 feet of space behind that door. A full 5-foot deep room that didn't appear on any plans. "We need to open it," Marcus said. "Could be structural damage back there. Could be water intrusion. We can't complete the restoration without knowing what's behind that door." I agreed, though something about the scratches made me uneasy. We got a pry bar and worked on forcing the door. It took 40 minutes of careful effort, but eventually we felt the interior bolt give way. The door shifted, just slightly, Ready? Marcus asked. I nodded. We pulled the door open together. The smell hit us first. Not decay wrong smell for that. This was older, drier, stale air that hadn't moved in decades, maybe longer. The space behind the door was small, exactly what the measurements suggested. 5 feet deep, 3 feet wide, maybe 6 feet tall. Just large enough for a person to stand in. But it wasn't empty. There was a chair, old wooden chair, sitting in the center of the small space. And on the wall opposite the door, carved deep into the stone, were words. I read them with my flashlight. Keep her here. She must not leave. Below that, smaller, for the safety of all. And below that, a date. The 12th of October, 1907. The day the mausoleum was completed. What is this? I said. Marcus was examining the walls with his flashlight. Look at this. The walls were covered in scratches. Not random organized. Words scratched into the stone, overlapping each other, covering every available surface. Hundreds of words, thousands of letters, all carved with something sharp into the marble walls. I started reading them. The same phrases repeated over and over. Let me out. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't mean to. And underneath everything, one phrase carved larger than the rest. Deep enough that it must have taken hours. I'm still here. This was a cell, Marcus said. His voice was tight. They built this mausoleum with a hidden cell inside it. I backed out of the small space. Who did this? Why? We checked the Ashford family records again. Looked at who was interred in the mausoleum. 6 family members total, buried between 1907 and 1963. The first burial was Charlotte Ashford. Died October 13, 1907, age 22. One day after the mausoleum was completed, I researched Charlotte Ashford. Found her death certificate. Cause of death listed as natural causes. No details, no explanation. But I found something else. Newspaper articles from October 1907. Young woman dies in family home. Charlotte Ashford, daughter of prominent industrialist Robert Ashford, found deceased in her room yesterday morning. Family declined to comment on circumstances. Private services to be held. And then, 2 weeks later, a small article buried in the local news section. The Ashford family has completed construction of a private mausoleum on the grounds of Westview Cemetery. Miss Charlotte Ashford, who passed recently, will be the first interred in the family structure. No details about the mausoleum's design. No mention of the hidden room. But I found one more article, from 1908, a year after Charlotte died. Robert Ashford's estate has been quietly sold. The industrialist and his family have relocated to Boston. Local sources suggest the move was prompted by ongoing difficulties related to last year's tragedy. They called Charlotte's death a tragedy. I went back to the mausoleum, stood in front of that small, hidden room, looked at the chair, at the scratched walls, at the desperate words carved into stone. And I noticed something I'd missed before. Near the bottom of the right wall, barely visible, a single line of text different from the others. They buried me here, alive. I felt cold, looked at the chair again, imagined someone sitting there, locked in the darkness, scratching at the walls, begging to be let out. Writing messages that no one would read until 117 years had passed. But that made no sense. The death certificate said natural causes, said Charlotte died in her home. She couldn't have been locked in here alive. She was already dead when the mausoleum was completed. Unless she wasn't dead. Unless she was alive when they sealed her in this room. Unless natural causes was a lie, and the real cause of death was asphyxiation in a hidden cell. But why? Why would a family do that to their own daughter? I searched more records. Found a journal entry from a distant Ashford cousin, written in 1930 and preserved in a historical society archive. Father told me before he died about cousin Charlotte. Said she'd become dangerous after her illness. Said she'd hurt people without meaning to. Said she couldn't control herself. The doctors called it madness, but Father said it was something worse. Said Robert made a difficult choice, one that still haunted him until his death. Said, sometimes you have to protect the living, even if it means condemning someone you love. Dangerous. Madness. Couldn't control herself. They locked her in that room, put her in there alive, sealed the door, left her to die in the darkness. And then they built the rest of the mausoleum around her prison, turning it into her tomb. And she scratched at the walls, begged to be released, wrote messages that no one would see, sat in that chair in the darkness, breathing stale air, until eventually she couldn't breathe anymore. We sealed the room, didn't tell the family what we'd found. They're all gone now anyway. Descendants who never knew about the hidden cell. We just closed the door, installed a new lock, and finished the restoration work on the rest of the mausoleum. But I still think about that room, about Charlotte Ashford, sitting in the darkness, scratching her pleas into stone, about the last words she carved. I'm still here, and I wonder if she is. If some part of her remained in that small space, trapped between the walls of her own tomb. If her consciousness lingered in the darkness, aware, present, unable to leave. Because when we sealed the door, when I pressed my ear against it one last time before we left, I heard something. Breathing, slow and steady, in and out. The sound of someone still alive in a space where no one could possibly be. I didn't tell Marcus, didn't tell anyone, just locked the door and walked away. But sometimes I wake up at night thinking about that sound, about Charlotte Ashford breathing in the darkness, about the scratches on the walls, about the words, I'm still here. And I wonder what she's doing in that room now. If she's still sitting in that chair, still scratching at the walls, still waiting for someone to finally, mercifully let her out, or if she's given up, if she's accepted her prison, if she's made peace with being trapped forever in a space just large enough for one person, with fresh air coming from nowhere, sealed behind a door that no one was ever meant to open. I hope she's at peace. But I don't think she is, because some prisons don't end with death. Some people can't leave even when they should. Some people stay exactly where they were put, breathing in the darkness, scratching their messages into stone, waiting, always waiting. The grave keeps sinking. I'm Quinn, head groundskeeper at Riverside Memorial, and I've worked with cemetery soil for 18 years. I know how graves settle, how earth compacts over time, how to identify and fix problems with plots. It's routine work, usually. Fill in depressions, reseed grass, maintain the surface. Sometimes you need to add soil a few times in the first year after burial as things settle. But Plot 7A is different. The burial was in March. Walter Kemp, 71 years old, died of complications from pneumonia. Standard burial concrete vault, steel casket, proper installation, everything by the book. We filled the grave, tamped the soil, seeded the grass. The surface was level, properly graded for drainage. First time I noticed the sinking was 2 days later. I was doing my morning rounds and saw a depression in the center of 7A. Not severe, maybe 3 inches deep, about 2 feet across. I figured it was normal settling. So I added soil and re-leveled the surface. Next morning, it was sunken again. Same spot, same depth. I filled it again. Third morning, same thing. I checked with our installation crew, asked if there had been any issues with the vault placement, any problems with the burial. They said everything had been normal, vault properly seated, no concerns. Sometimes ground settles more than expected, our crew chief said. Clay soil can compact significantly. I knew that. But this wasn't normal settling. This was consistent, repeatable depression in the same spot, like something underneath was pulling the soil down. I filled the grave 5 times that first week. Every morning, I'd find it sunken 3 inches in the center. Every morning, I'd add soil and level it. Every next morning, it would be sunk again. After 2 weeks, I recommended we check the vault. Maybe there was a structural problem, maybe the concrete had cracked. The family gave permission for a ground probe. We could insert a camera without full excavation, check the vault integrity. We did the probe on a Thursday. The vault looked fine. Concrete intact, no cracks, no water intrusion. The casket inside appeared undisturbed. Everything looked exactly as it should. But the grave kept sinking. I started documenting it carefully. Measured the depression each morning, always 3 inches. Always the same diameter. Filled it with precisely measured soil. Set up a time-lapse camera to watch the grave overnight. I reviewed the footage. Nothing happened for hours. Then, at exactly 2:33 in the morning, the soil started to move. Not fast. Not dramatically. It just lowered. Sank straight down. Smooth and steady. Like something underneath had stopped holding it up. Within 6 seconds, the surface had dropped 3 inches. Then it stopped. No cave-in. No sudden collapse. Just a slow, steady descent. Like an elevator going down. I showed the footage to our cemetery manager. She watched it 3 times, frowning. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "What would cause that? I don't know. But it happens every night." We brought in a structural engineer. He examined the site, reviewed our installation records, checked the soil composition. He set up ground-penetrating radar to map what was below the surface. The vault was exactly where it should be. No voids underneath, no cavities, no structural problems. The ground beneath the vault was solid, undisturbed earth. "I can't explain the sinking," the engineer said. "There's nothing wrong with the installation, and there's no structural reason for this depression to keep forming. But it did. Every night, 2:33 in the morning, the grave would sink 3 inches. Every morning, I'd fill it again. After 6 weeks, the family asked if we could exhume and rebury. Said they couldn't stand the thought of the grave being unstable. I arranged for a full exhumation. We'd move Walter Kemp to a different plot, properly stabilize 7A before using it again. We opened the grave on a Tuesday morning. The process is methodical. Remove the soil layer by layer, expose the vault, lift it out, examine everything carefully. The vault was fine. Still intact, still sealed properly. We lifted it completely out of the ground and opened it. The casket was undisturbed, still sealed, no damage. We checked Walter Kemp himself. He looked exactly as he had at burial. No decomposition issues, no problems with preservation. Everything was normal, except for one thing. Inside the casket, resting on Walter Kemp's chest, was a note, handwritten on old paper, folded once. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "I'm going deeper. Don't try to keep me here. Let me go where I need to be." No signature, just those 2 sentences. "Where did this come from?" the crew chief asked. No one had an answer. The casket had been sealed at the funeral home. No one had opened it since. The note shouldn't exist. Walter Kemp's daughter came to the cemetery while we had the vault out. We showed her the note. She read it, then read it again, her face going pale. "That's Dad's handwriting," she said quietly. "That's definitely his handwriting. Mrs. Coleman, that's not possible. The casket has been—" "I know what you're going to say. I know it doesn't make sense." She looked at the empty grave, at plot 7A with its hollow pit. "But Dad believed in certain things. Spiritual things. He used to say that when he died, he wanted to go deep, wanted to return to the earth properly, all the way down. Said being buried 6 feet down wasn't enough." "What did he mean?" "I don't know. He never explained it." She folded the note carefully, but he was serious about it. "Made me promise, when the time came, that I wouldn't try to keep him on the surface, that I'd let him go as deep as he needed. We had a choice. We could rebury Walter Kemp in a different plot, try to stabilize 7A, make everything normal, or we could honor what the note said, what Walter Kemp apparently wanted. His daughter made the decision. Put him back. Let him go where he wants to go. So we did. Lowered the vault back into 7A, filled the grave, didn't tamp the soil too tightly this time, just filled it and let it settle naturally. That night, I stayed late. Set up my camera again. Positioned it to capture Plot 7A. At 2:33 in the morning, I watched it live, instead of reviewing footage later. The grave sank. Same as before, smooth, steady, 3 inches in 6 seconds. But this time, I didn't fill it the next morning. Just left it. Watched to see what would happen. The next night, it sank again. 3 more inches. And the night after that. And the night after that. Every night, at 2:33, the grave descended 3 inches. After a week, it had dropped 21 inches. After 2 weeks, 42 inches. I stopped measuring after a month. The grave was noticeably sunken now. The center may be 6 feet lower than the surrounding ground, deep enough that you could stand in the depression and the surface would be at chest height. But it was stable. The edges weren't collapsing inward. The grass was still growing. Just the center was sinking, slowly and steadily, night after night. The cemetery manager asked if we should stop it, fill it in, stabilize it, prevent further sinking. I told her about the note, about Walter Kemp's daughter saying to let him go where he wanted to go. How deep is he going to sink? The manager asked. I don't know. This is unprecedented. We can't have a grave that just keeps getting deeper. Then seal it. Lock the cemetery gates. Make sure no one can access it. I looked at Plot 7A, at the deepening depression. But don't try to stop it. Let him finish whatever this is. She agreed, reluctantly. We cordoned off the area, installed safety barriers, made sure no one would accidentally fall into the deepening grave. And we watched. 6 months later, Plot 7A is 30 feet below ground level. 30 feet straight down, a perfectly vertical shaft with Walter Kemp's vault at the bottom. We can't see it anymore. The depression is too deep, too dark, but we know it's still there because the sinking continues. Every night at 2:33, 3 inches at a time, steady, precise, unstoppable. I've tried to calculate how deep he'll go. If this continues at the current rate, he'll be 100 feet down within a year, 200 feet in 2 years, going deeper. Just like the note said, last week I stayed late again, wanted to listen at the edge of Plot 7A, wanted to know if there was any sound from down below. At 2:33 in the morning, I pressed my ear to the ground at the edge of the depression, and I heard it, faint and distant, but unmistakable. Something moving, soil shifting, earth compacting, the sound of downward progress, and underneath that, even fainter, something else. A sound like breathing, or maybe like contentment, like satisfaction, like Walter Kemp was exactly where he wanted to be, going exactly where he needed to go. I don't work at Plot 7A anymore. Don't measure it, don't document it. Just let it continue its slow descent into the earth. Because some people don't want to rest on the surface, don't want to lie at the arbitrary depth we've decided is appropriate for the dead. Some people want to go deeper, want to return to the earth completely, to descend until they've reached whatever final resting place they're seeking. And Walter Kemp is still descending, still sinking 3 inches every night, dropping steadily into depths that should be impossible, that defy everything we know about burials and graves and how the dead should rest. But maybe we don't know everything. Maybe some people have their own ideas about where they should be, how deep they need to go. And maybe our job isn't to stop them, just to stand at the edge and watch them descend, wish them well on their journey, and hope that wherever they're going, however deep it is, they find what they're looking for when they finally reach the bottom. If there is a bottom, if there's ever meant to be an end to going deeper.